Trade has been dominating the Trump administration's economic agenda. The president is tweeting about it. He's referencing in speeches. The administration has levied tariffs on imports, and our trading partners have responded. So trade is much more in the public consciousness than it typically is. So in that sense, it probably will be more important in the 2018 midterms than in a typical election. But according to recent polling, only about 1% of Americans think that trade or the trade deficit is the country's most pressing problem. So compared to other issue areas, while it will be more important than in past elections, it probably won't be driving voter outcomes in the midterms. So in terms of the impact of these trade policies, it's hard to see them in the typical economic statistics that we look at. So by traditional metrics, we have a pretty strong economy. Unemployment remains quite low. Wages are inching up. So it's hard for the public to see the fact that tariffs are impacting some companies. It's creating some uncertainty in the markets. If you look at the stock market, it does move around day to day depending on trade policy decisions. But for the average American consumer, they probably haven't felt any of these trade policy changes yet. While a political diversity of places will be implicated by these tariffs, they tend to impact counties that voted for President Trump in the 2016 election much more than counties that voted for Secretary Clinton. So if you look at the share of exports implicated by the tariffs in Trump counties, it's about 5.4% versus a little over 2% in Clinton counties. So even though the industries and the commodities that are targeted by these retaliatory tariffs tend to come to ground in red districts, it's unlikely that this will move voters in those districts, say, from Republican to Democrat. It may happen in certain instances. So if you look at a SurveyMonkey poll, Republicans are actually quite supportive of President Trump's trade policies. Nearly 80% of Republicans are in favor of these tariffs. As you may guess, Democrats are much less supportive of these trade policies. So like a lot of issues currently in the United States, your party affiliation seems to be driving your view on particular policy issues, not the other way around. So I would not expect that even though some of these trade policies may be disproportionately harming Trump counties, that you're going to see a major swing in voters going from Republican to Democrat. The retaliatory tariffs from our trading partners have been politically targeted. So if you look at the fact that bourbon is on the tariff list, which is a major export of Kentucky, which is Senator Mitch McConnell's home state, or Harley-Davidson motorcycles, which come from Wisconsin, where Representative Paul Ryan represents, you're seeing that the leaders of these countries are keenly aware of domestic U.S. politics and who is in political control. Of course, the way these politicians are arguing this now is that it is temporary pain for their districts for longer-term gain in terms of the trading relationships with China in particular. So they're pitching it to their constituents as a negotiating tactic that won't be permanent, but will be eventually bearing fruit in the longer term for the U.S. economy and for those local economies. And so how that plays out in the midterms will be really interesting to see if voters hold their leaders to account for some of these very targeted retaliatory tariffs.